Welcome to Sykes Peak. Join us as we speak with experts, share inspiring stories, and provide actionable advice to help you reach your psychological peak. So get ready to embark on a journey of self-discovery, growth, and empowerment. We're back to our next session, our first session, actually, beyond the introduction session. And today we're going to talk about boundaries.
Yes.
And, as we were doing the prep for this, we realized that this is probably not going to be covered in one session. It could be, we're saying 2, but it could be 3. We could talk about this for a week.
Till the cows come home.
That's right. And unless they're in a fence, which means they're in a boundary.
That's right.
But the idea here is that we're going to discuss the idea and the concept of boundaries and what happens. And as we were doing the prep for this, and as we were thinking this through, we were talking about boundaries along the lines of rules and limits, and just have an understanding of what that is. And as we were breaking it down, we thought, well, let's define what a boundary is. Sean, what was your idea and your concept about what a boundary is?
Well, I think that oftentimes people will look at a boundary and they'll think of it as a regulation or a rule, a restriction.
Yeah.
And I think that it's better identified as goal oriented, where you're thinking about more intentionally what you're trying to achieve. And so when you make a rule, you set a bumper for a bowling lane. It's to guide the ball to the pins better.
That's the kind of bowling that I like. The ones that got the bumpers.
Oh yeah.
In the alleys. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the great things about boundaries. They help you win at life.
Right. Well, and looking at a boundary's not, like you said, it's not necessarily a restriction, because what you have to do is you have to understand who you are.
Yes.
In order to set that boundary. And a lot of times, because of our upbringing, and we probably get a little bit Freudian in this concept, but or in this issue. But when you think about your upbringing, you think about the environment that you grew up in. If you grew up in an environment that had no boundaries,
yes,
then that can lead to issues in your adult life.
Yeah, and
issues in your adult life, like what are they? It's referred to as serial dating. Or, you can't find a relationship that you can stick with. And because there are restrictions in certain relationships that says, for example, if you get involved in a relationship and you say, I want you to be exclusively my girlfriend or my boyfriend, and that's a restriction that's put on that individual, then what happens if you haven't had boundaries in your life or restrictions in your life, then you look at it and go, don't block me in. Don't, you're
Right.
smothering me, and the consequences of that are that you break that relationship off and you go to the next relationship.
Be very damaging.
And you just keep going to, multiple relationships. Why they call it serial dating, so
Self-awareness is really important. I mean, as a redhead, if I go out into the sun without any SPF, I'm going to deal with disastrous consequences, and I can complain about it all day long, how unfair it is that I have to have SPF 5,000. But the results are my own. And so that limitation comes from my knowing myself and what works for me and how to apply.
So that's why
limitations.
Yeah. And that's why we came up with the idea, or, in understanding boundaries, that it's not just a physical limitation, but that there's an emotional limitation. And that's where the limits come in our lives, so there's There's physical limits, there's emotional limits, there's psychological limits, because, you may take on something that psychologically is also speaking to your level of education. You may take on something that is way out of your league, and you fail at it. And when you fail at it, then that begins to reinforce a thought in your mind that says, I'm really not that good, or I'm not that smart, or I'm not that capable, and then that limits your abilities. Now, that doesn't have anything necessarily to do with boundaries, but, as far as the boundaries we're talking about, but it has to do with that self-awareness that you have. If you know what your limits are, it's easy to set the boundaries. When I was 5 years old, my dad set boundaries. Easily, it was easy. Don't ride your bike on Sullivan Road. Sullivan Road was a shot tar road. I don't know if people know what that is, but it's just basically rock that's been put down, and they put tar over the top of it. It wasn't even an asphalt road. For the longest time, it wasn't. And so, he didn't want me riding my bike on that road. Plus, it was a through road in our community from one highway to another highway. And people would drive rather recklessly,
Right.
and just speeding and that sort of thing. But it had a great downhill, man. I couldn't avoid it.
Yeah, you needed the thrill.
And he said, do not ride on this road. Well, he didn't really give me a reason on why not to,
Right.
because of all those dangers. I mean, as an adult, I know those now. But as a 5-year-old kid, I was just riding my bike.
Yeah, he's just trying to take away from your fun.
Yeah. And
Right.
so when I would ride on Sullivan Road, the tar would get on my tires. That's hard to say if you're Southern.
Yeah.
Tar and tars,
Yeah.
but the tar would get on my tires.
Yeah.
And and he would come home and he would sit on my bike and he would say, you rode on Sullivan Road today, didn't you? And I would look at him and I would go, who told you? Of course it would be me that was telling him, because I was a stupid 5-year-old. But and then the next thing, click, the lock on the sprocket, and that was it. And I couldn't ride my bike.
Over.
Yeah. They took it away for 2 weeks. Now, that has to do with setting boundaries. The boundary was, don't ride your bike on
Right.
this road. You can ride it in other places, but don't ride on this road.
Safety.
If you do, there is a consequence.
Yes.
So that's,
And some of those consequences are natural. I mean, play with fire. Sometimes you get burned.
I know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that'll be that.
We'll get there at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. So
You mentioned something really interesting too. I want to go back to the, there are different types for the different parts of us. There's physical, there's emotional. I think physical are really easy for people to recognize. There's almost a natural instinct sometimes to want to be cautious, slow down if you see a cop down the end of the road or something. When your parents are home, don't break the rules, but the second they're gone, throw a party. There's these. I think we know when we're potentially in a more immediate danger sometimes, but we test boundaries. We do as children, and we'll push on those. But I think the emotional ones are probably a lot harder for people to recognize as they go through life, to know, oh, how do I set this boundary emotionally for myself more than with even the other person?
And I think that, people look at that and go, yeah, it's really hard. And it's hard for me to set boundaries in my life. But what can help me set those boundaries? Well, we'll get to that, when we get to the application aspect of the issue. But there is an aspect that it starts when you are young. And, because young, meaning, 2 years old. I watch my grandson and I keep an eye on him, but I give him some freedom to play. And I think that a lot of the play is where you learn, you learn the rules. And you learn the rules of life and when you're playing. because if you jump on one end of a rake, the other end's going to come at you. That's just kind of physics, and so you learn not to jump on one end of the rake, or for me, it was a bicycle rim. It's a circle. I was a little guy. I jumped on one side. The other side came up and hit me right between my eyes at the top of the bridge of my nose, and put a 5-stitch cut across the bridge of my nose. And I learned real quick that you don't jump on, I just thought I was just out playing, and I just jumped on one side. But I was also doing something that I wasn't supposed to be doing, and that was I took a steak knife from my grandmother's drawer,
Right.
silverware drawer, and I was sticking it in the ground, and I was just, how you play mumbly peg or whatever, just sticking it in the ground.
Yep.
And I stuck it in the ground right in the circle of that bicycle rim that was laying on it's one of those 26-inch rims, and I jumped on one side of it, and the other side just came and hit me right between the eyes. You realize that probably shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Right before it hits you.
Yeah.
But once again, the boundaries, the rules. I mean, the rules were don't play with knives.
Right.
That was the main rule. But we have rules in our life to control the chaos.
Yeah. I have an interesting story actually about that. It's very similar because I actually was involved with a knife. My dad had a pruning kit, had
Knives
a
and boys.
very, very sharp knife. And I went out and got a stick, and I was gonna shave the bark off it real nice and smooth and make it a nice walking stick. And I was gonna prove that I knew how to use a knife, and then Dad would let me use knives, So I was out there just shaving off these knots on it and stuff, and had good left hand, strong grip on it, and then right hand just working the top of it, working the knife away from me, doing, as I knew to do. My dad had taught me, this is how you use a knife. There's the rules about how to use a knife, right? And then I mistakenly forgot that rule for a moment and turned the blade the other direction and went to get a knot off the top of the stick. And when I got the knot off, it popped off, and the knife went down the stick real quick, and it went down to my thumb. And I thought, oh my gosh, I was so close. I went and looked and didn't have any damage. All right, going back to shaving off the top of the stick. Everything was fine for a few minutes. I went to go feel it with my left hand, how smooth it was. And when I looked, there was a red line down the stick, and I thought, oh, what is that? And I looked down at my hand. It was covered in blood. There was a pool of blood underneath my feet. And I thought, oh no, I've done it now. Yeah. And here's the fun part. The second rule kicked into my head. Don't get anything on Mom's carpet. So I was in the front of the house, and I thought, well, I can't go through the living room. Mom will chew me out if I go through bleeding all over the carpet. So I decided, and I was young. I was maybe 8.5, 9 years old. And I did not do well with blood, and I was getting lightheaded. So I was going around the outside of our house in Jordan, right? White stone building. And I'm smearing blood all over the outside of the house. And I'm walking around lightheaded, leaning up against the house to keep myself standing. I go all the way around the house and get to the back door, and I'm knocking on the back door to the kitchen because it's locked, and my mom's inside. And she's like thinking to herself, who's at the back door? So she goes to open the back door, and I'm there. And the only thing I said to her was, I made a bad decision. Just immediate admittance of my fault, right? And she sees the blood. She grabs my hand, squeezes it real hard. My grandfather was visiting us from here in the States, and he was a country doctor, so he knew exactly what to do. Took me into the bathroom. Oh, man, he squeezed my finger so hard. It hurt so bad. But he ran that under cold water, got the bleeding to stop. I sliced my thumb down to the bone at least. So it was deep. It was deep, straight in half. And so my mom goes, and while he's taking care of me, she's looking around the house. It looks like a murder scene, just like what? And then afterwards, she asked, she's like, "Why did you walk around the whole house bleeding all over it?" And I was like, "I just didn't want to get blood on the carpet, But those rules, rule was don't take dad's knife. That was the first mistake I made. But the other one was forgetting the rules he had taught me in the process. Thankfully, I did minimize my punishment a little bit from my mom.
Well, the idea of breaking the rules, that's where we get experience from. And when we get experience, what it is that, that teaches us what our boundaries are, how far we can go, how far is too far. Boundaries apply to everything. And so, when someone, say we have a young parent out there that's listening or a parent that's listening that has a young child, how far do you allow that young child to do a discovery? And I put quotation marks around discovery. How far do you let them go?
Yeah.
I mean, do you have an answer for that?
No. Again, that awareness helps. Knowing the child, its curiosity, where is it going?
Yeah, you don't want to inhibit that curiosity, because that's going to be something that they have in later on in their life.
Yeah, if my dad had said, no, I'm never going to teach you anything about a knife, I'm never going to let you near a knife, you can't see a knife, I think my curiosity would have probably grown stronger. I would have wanted it more. I would have probably been more reckless.
So do we then embrace the things that we want our children to know about, and how to do them because life is dangerous. I mean, just living life is dangerous. I mean, just walking out in your backyard, you need to be able to identify snakes. You need to be able to identify poison ivy. You need to be able to, all those are the things that, we were taught when we were little kids, or I was taught when I was a little kid. Don't grab this, don't pick this up, don't, reach for this, not that, my dad had we'll say a healthy respect for snakes. And he didn't like them. And there's a lot of people out there, they call them, nope ropes, they whatever.
Yeah.
But, I worked at a camp, and we would have to tell the kids, do not grab a snake. You don't know how to identify the snake. We haven't done the snake identification class yet. You just don't know. And there was one kid, and he was out one day, and he had free time, and he was turning over logs and boards, and he was looking for snakes, and one that he reached down to grab was a copperhead, and it got him. And it wasn't a dry bite, it got him. And we were 25 minutes away from a hospital, coming out of the mountains and getting to a hospital experience or an emergency room. But we set the limits, and we also have boundaries on the camp boundaries, just how far was too far. And they, kids are kids. They're gonna test the boundaries wherever they can.
One of the things that, kind of going back a little bit to what you were saying about what age to start, I remember hearing, I don't remember if it was another podcast or radio show, but I remember two gentlemen talking about, limits and boundaries and restrictions for children. And if you start younger, as they get older, that exploration doesn't need as much restriction. It doesn't need as many boundaries, because those core principles and values have already been instilled at such a young age that as a parent, you don't have to deal with, should I restrict this? Or should I, it really is already kind of implanted those, I don't know which is one to call them guiding principles, right? Those bumpers, keep you in that direction. So it, for me visually kind of has an angle effect to it where you're more restrictive at the beginning and less restrictive as children are older.
Well, because they learned
to restrict themselves,
the limitations. They learn how far is too far on their own. Boy, I tell you what, there's a lot to say on these things, so we had to break this one up into another session. Listen to that one now.